All right, now that we have our model all UV'd, we're almost ready to start the fun part, which is texturing. Now, before we bring this into Substance Painter to texture it, I want to do a little bit of preparation for the model. And to do that, basically what we're going to do here is separate the model out into parts that are going to be different materials. And the reason we're doing this is to create what's called an ID map. And an ID map will allow us to select certain parts of the model and apply different types of materials to the model. Now, you can make an ID map manually. All you have to do is take your UV layout, do a UV snapshot. So that's this little camera button right here. We do a UV snapshot, save out a JPEG. You can then take that into a program like Photoshop, and you just basically you make the image different colors where you want there to be a different type of material. This will make a lot more sense once we get into Substance Painter. But in the meantime, what I want to do is just separate my model out to different parts. So I can then very easily assign different materials to different parts. So the way we want to do this is I'm just going to grab my whole model and do mesh separate. And then that will separate everything out into different parts. And then I'm going to combine back together things that are the same or similar material. So like the two buttons here are the same sort of red plastic material. So I'm going to go to mesh combine. And then the same with these two buttons, mesh combine. And then the other thing here that's a different material is this top part of our controller body. So I want to take this and sort of separate that out because I want to assign a different material to that. So the way I'm going to do this is just jump in from actually there's a really easy way we can select this with our UVs, right? So we already did our UVs. So the easy way I can select just this part right here and separate it out is to go to our shell mode. And then I'm just going to select that piece by itself. And then you can see in our 3D view here that we just have those faces selected. And then I'm going to go to edit mesh, extract. And now we see that that is a separate material or a separate object. Now, the little button islands, all of those are the same sort of gray plastic material as the rest of the controller. So I'm going to leave those all as one sort of combined item. And we're going to just export it out the way that it is here. So I'm going to go to File, Export. Actually, let's select our entire model here. And then I'm going to go to File, Export Selection. And I want to export this out as FBX. So I'm going to name it something like NES controller for texture. Right, and this will save to my controller project directory. And we'll just hit export selection. And then before I go further, I want to undo what I did because I basically want this, my end result, I want it to be the way it was where everything was combined together and this wasn't separated. So that export that I sent out, that's just for texturing purposes. And the original model, I want it to be back the way that it was. So I'm just going to hit Control or Command Z a couple times to sort of undo everything that I just did. Right, so I'm just going to hit Command Z until it's back to one solid model like this before I close out Maya. You could also just close Maya without saving, and that will essentially do the same thing. But I'm always sort of like wary about like accidentally hitting save and saving over something. So I like to do it this way. All right, now here we are in Substance Painter. Now, I want you to think about Substance Painter more of like a Photoshop application than a 3D application like Maya. It's much more similar to something like Photoshop than it is to something like Maya, even though you have a 3D view and everything. So I'm going to try to sort of explain the interface of Substance Painter as we move forward and as we start on our project or bring in our project. So, so I'm going to try to explain things as I go, but just kind of in your mind, think of Substance Painter as more of like a Photoshop application than like a 3D Maya or 3D modeling application. So once we're inside Substance Painter, what we're going to do is start a new project, and we're going to do that by going to File, New, and this will bring up this new project window. For template, I generally set mine to just PBR and metallic roughness. This is good for Arnold, which we're going to use to render in Maya. There are some other presets in here. You see there's one for Blender. There's one for Keyshot, Maxwell Render, a few other things. But this is just sort of like the basic template that we're going to be using. So just set it to PBR metallic roughness, and that should give you everything that you need to do. Now for file, that's going to be that exported Maya file, that exported FBX file that we exported out. So I'm just going to navigate to where that file is. So in my controller project window, so I'm going to open that up. And in document resolution, this is the resolution of the screen here. So this is not your texture size. If you have a higher resolution monitor, you may want to up this to a higher resolution setting like 2048. But in my case, I think 1024 is fine. If you go too high with that, it will slow down your machine a little bit. But just keep in mind that this is not your texture size. This is your document resolution, and you can actually increase this at any time if you want. Normal map format, I'm going to leave at DirectX. The only other thing that I'm going to change here is I want to make sure these two settings here are unchecked. I don't want to bring in my cameras, and I don't want to auto unwrap. If you auto unwrap, it's basically like automatic mapping in Maya. So it's basically going to give you, it's going to undo all of our UVs that we did, right? It's just going to spit out a procedural UV layout that may or may not be good, right? So we don't want to do auto unwrap. You want to take the time to do your own UVs so you can kind of control it. It's a much more controlled situation if you do your own UVs. So that's the only other thing we're going to change here, is just making sure that those two settings are unchecked. And then I'm going to hit OK. And there is our model. So we have a 3D view here. This will navigate pretty much the exact same way as Maya. So holding down Alt or Option, and then left, middle, and right mouse clicks. And then over here we have our UV view, which navigates basically the same exact way. Now, for the moment, I like to just kind of slide my UV view over and just concentrate on my 3D view here. And then I only go into the UV view if I feel that I need to, which we will probably do that at some point. Over here on the very left, you have your tools. Again, just like in Photoshop, you have a smudge tool, eraser, paintbrush, pen tool. This is sort of like your library of assets. This is where your smart materials, regular materials, and your smart masks live. And then over here on the right, we have our layers and our texture set setting. This is your material right here. Sometimes if you bring in an object, it may have two different materials on it, and you can switch between them here. Before we do anything here, we're going to go over to texture set settings, and we want to set this up so we get our texture the correct size. So this is your texture size here. For this controller, I want it to look really good. So I'm going to do a 4096 texture. Again, this is very dependent on the machine that you're running. You may not be able to go that high. If you're running off a laptop or something like that, you may want to bump that down to 1024 or 2048. But I have a pretty beefy computer here, so I'm going to go with 4096. These channels here, these are all the individual texture maps that are going to get exported out. Some of these we may not even need, like opacity and emissive. We probably won't be using those, but I'm going to leave those in there just in case. But everything else will be the exported images that come out of Substance Painter when we're done texturing. And then down here, mesh maps. This is something you need to do before you get started. Otherwise, your smart materials and smart masks will not work. So the first thing we want to do before we start painting and adding materials is bake our mesh maps. Now, basically what mesh maps are these sort of utility informational maps that will tell the software sort of like how far apart objects are, to give them, like, you know, it'll tell it like where the corners are so it can add dirt in those corners. It basically makes our smart materials smart. Without our mesh maps, our smart materials and smart masks are dumb, right? So they won't know where to put the details if we don't have our mesh maps. So before we do anything, we want to bake our mesh maps. So I'm going to click Bake Mesh Maps. And this will go into a new little navigational window again. And you see some settings over here. And I'm just going to kind of briefly explain some of these settings. The output size here, right now I'm just in my common settings. And the output settings or output size, these are the size, this is the resolution of our mesh maps. You typically want them to be the same size as your texture map. So as the setting that we put in just a few seconds ago, 4096, I'm going to set that there as well. Now you can also make this higher. You can go all the way up to 8192. Again, it's very dependent on the machine that you're running on. So I'm going to set this to 4096. I'm going to click Use Low Poly Mesh as High Poly Mesh. So I'm just going to check that. And the only other thing that I'm going to change here is I'm going to go to ID. This is where we're going to bake our ID map, right? So, and I'm going to change my color source here to Mesh ID or poly groups. So this is why we separated our object into different colors or different objects. So we can assign different materials. Again, this will make a lot more sense once we get started here and actually start using these features. Color generator, I like to just do random color, and that's it. So those are the only settings that I change here. I just change output size to match my texture size. I check Use Low Poly Mesh as High Poly, and then I come down here to ID. And I change my color source to Mesh ID and my color generator to random. And then we can click Bake Selected Textures. There's our ID map. You can see that it's just going to bake all these interesting looking mesh maps. And then when it's done, you can see all of the different maps here. And we can just kind of return to painting mode. Now we can actually get started with the fun part. We can actually start texturing our model a little bit. Now, just to sort of show you the things that we can do here with smart materials, let me go over to my layers tab. And see, this is a lot like Photoshop here. We have different layers. We have blending modes. We have opacity. And we have different options for our brushes here. So I can come over here to my smart materials, which is this setting here, and we'll look at something like steel paint, and I can just drag and drop that onto my controller here. And you can see that automatically, because it has those mesh maps to read from, it will sort of put scratches in areas or wear and tear on areas where it's appropriate to put those wear and tear details. And it'll put like dirt and grime also in appropriate areas. So it's very cool to kind of play around with smart materials. And if we come over here, basically what a smart material is a folder with a bunch of different layers in it, right? So if I come over to my layers and just sort of expand that folder, we can kind of look around here and say, there's the base metal. So if I wanted to come in and change the color of the base metal, so maybe I want it to be like a copper or a gold color, right? We can change that there. I can also change the color of the paint, right? If I wanted this to be more of a blue color. So you can customize everything. Now, as cool as smart materials are, I typically don't like to use them. I do use smart masks, and we will cover that. But I think it's really important that you learn how to make your own materials and build up your own layers rather than relying solely on smart materials. The smart materials are very recognizable as just a procedural material. And it doesn't give you sort of like the detail and or attention to detail and the thought or sort of like story. You want your object to tell a story. And the smart material is just sort of like, it's very procedural, right? It's kind of like AI, like it's very recognizable that was just a procedural material. So rather than using a smart material, I think it's really important to learn how to make your own materials and maybe use smart masks. And that's what I'm going to show you how to do today. So we're going to just delete that smart material here. And we're going to start by just building up basic colors of our object. So let's start with the base gray color here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this fill bucket right here, click that, and that will create a fill layer. And a fill layer is basically just a solid color, right? So for this, I don't want anything here. I don't want any of these other attributes except for roughness and color. Those are the only two attributes that I want. And we're going to change this to a slightly darker gray and maybe even make it a little yellowish, right? So a lot of like old plastics have a tendency to yellow a little bit. So I'm going to make it a little bit yellow and kind of a dark gray. And then we want this to be kind of shiny, right? This is a shiny material. So I'm going to take my roughness down quite a bit to kind of make that a shiny material. And we can rotate our object around to see how that reflects. And the beauty about this is I can go in and tweak this and I can change this at any time. Let's make our layer, let's change our layer name here to just like base gray plastic. Right? And now let's make another material. So maybe let's make a material for our buttons here. So once again, I'm just going to come to my paint bucket. And again, the only attributes I want to begin with here are just roughness and color. I'm going to make our object or our color red. And once again, I'm going to bring down the roughness so they're kind of shiny. Now here is where I accidentally delete my my properties panel. We should be able to find this again if we just come to view, window view, toolbars. Let's see if we can find it. Properties, and that will bring our properties menu back. Anytime you accidentally delete a window or a tab, you should be able to find it somewhere in your Windows menu. Okay, so obviously I only want this red color. Let's rename this to red buttons. Obviously, I only want this on my buttons, right? So this is where the magic of that ID map comes in handy. So this is the whole reason we separated out our objects and we created an ID map, which is extremely important for this process, right? So What I'm going to do now is come up to my little mask button right here, and I'm going to click that, and I'm going to say add mask with color selection. And you can see that it automatically has our ID mask there, or our ID map. And all I have to do is say pick color and say, I only want this to be, on my button. So I'm just going to pick that sort of violet color, I think. And now that's only on our buttons. Now I can do this to multiple objects. So I can say pick color again and say, maybe I want it here. I can click it there as well. And then I can sort of delete that there too. So, and again, this is completely customizable. So if I want to come in and say, I think these buttons should be a little bit darker, something around there. There we go. Now let's see what else. We want we want our controller button here to be, or our D-pad, directional pad, to be sort of like a black plastic. So let's go ahead and once again, we'll do the same thing. Again, I only want roughness and color. And we're going to make this black. And once again, we want it to be a little shiny. So I'm going to bring the roughness down a little bit. We'll call this D-pad. Let's just say black D-pad. And once again, we're going to add a mask with color selection here. Say pick color, then we pick our D-pad, and there is our color. Now, the other thing I want to do here before we get into maybe looking for some materials to use is I want to deal with our little panel right there that we have under our controller. And I just want this to be a very flat, black, non-reflective color. So once again, I'm going to make just a blank fill layer and turn off everything but color and roughness. I'm going to make this black, and I'm going to take, in this case, I don't want this to be reflective at all. It's supposed to just look like a black void. I'm going to increase my roughness all the way up. So it's a very matte black finish. And we'll just call this matte black. And once again, I want to add a mask with color selection. And in this case, I can't really see that object from my 3D view. So this is where we're going to use our UV view here. So I'm going to say pick color, and then I'm going to click that right there, and that adds that black color to it. Okay, so now let's get a little bit creative with using some of our materials here. So I'm going to come over to, I'm not going to use a smart material, but I'm going to look in just my regular materials, and I'm going to type in plastic. And that will just bring up, it's just sort of like a search menu that will bring up our material. If you hover over them, you can kind of get an idea of what they're going to look like. And I want this sort of plastic grip to be on the sort of front panel area of my controller. So I'm just going to drag and drop that onto my controller. So just left click, drag, and drop that on. And that will apply it to my entire object. And I'm just going to keep it named plastic grip. I think that's appropriate. And just looking at our settings down here, I do want to come down to tiling. And I'm going to increase the tiling so we get a little bit more of a small sort of like sandpaper look to that. So maybe something like that. And then once again, I'm just going to mask that with a color selection. So click add mask with color selection. And then I'm just going to add this to this area here. Right. So now it's really starting to look like our controller. Right. Really cool. Now we need like a rubber material. So let's come up here and search for rubber. and see if we can find anything. There's raw rubber right there. That one looks pretty cool. And that's the same one we just used. Let's just go with raw rubber. And again, I'm just going to click and drag that on. And this one has, for some reason, it has a sort of grain to it. And this should be a very smooth rubber. So let's look at our settings here and see if we can find something that that we can tweak here to kind of get rid of that roughness. So maybe this raw roughness. Let's bring that down a little bit. And I don't see that that's really doing anything. Color variation, rubber raw roughness. Let that think for a second. No, that's not it. Let's bring that back up. This may be something we just want to make from scratch. Let's just kind of bring up our tiling a little bit to see if we can get those details to be a little smaller. Right, and that seems to do the opposite of what we want. So let's actually bring it down. Right. I think that actually looks good if we bring it down to something like 0.01 or 0.07. Let's look at it kind of far away. Or if we just bring it down to 0. Right, then it's just sort of like a flat rubber color. I think I like that the best. So once again, let's just mask this with a color selection. And for this one, I'm going to do both my buttons and my cord here. So I'm going to say pick color. We will select our buttons and then pick color again and select the cord. Right, and let's go ahead and save this. So File, Save As, and I'm going to go to my desktop and just put this in my controller project. And we're going to save this as a NES controller. And this will save as a SPP file, which is a Substance Painter file. And click Save. Okay, so now we have sort of our base color set up. I do want to add quite a bit more details. There's more details to add on this sort of surface here. But before I do that, I want to do a little bit of organization here. I'm just going to take all of my layers that I've created just by holding down Shift and selecting them all. And I'm going to hit Control G, which will put them all in a folder that I can then name Base Colors. And if I need to, I can go in and edit these individually. But this is a great starting point for adding other details. And we're going to add quite a bit of other details. We're going to look at a reference. There is like a gray sort of print detail here. We have arrow sort of little shapes that we can add to our D-pad. And then we can even take it a bit further and maybe add some stickers to it and some dirt and grime and things like that. We can even sort of add the seam that that goes all the way around it. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is start adding some custom details. So if I'm looking at my reference here, we have these sort of rectangles with rounded corners, and we have like these arrows here that we're going to put on our D-pad. We have some text. Now I think we can do the text in within Substance Painter, so we'll get to that later. But I don't think we can get away with what's already included in Substance Painter to make the arrows and the rectangles. And just to show you that, if we come up here to our library and we search for something like square, and if you click off this guy right here, so we're not, so we're basically not just limiting our search to materials. If we click off of that, we open the search up to everything in our library. So we do have some squares in here. And for example, I can take one of these. So I have a copy of the plastic grip material that I made here. And just to show you how to do that, let's go ahead and delete that one. And then I'm just going to take my plastic grip material and we're going to duplicate it. So I'm just going to right click, duplicate layer. And then we can come down here and change the color of that to be sort of like a gray, much more of a gray color, like that's on those rectangles. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete this mask. So I'm going to right click the mask here and say remove mask, right? And then that will be on everything. So then what I could do is like say, take this rectangle here and let's do this in our UV view. So I'm going to take this rectangle and I'm just going to drag and drop this here and just do mask. And you can see that basically now that it does this weird thing where it duplicates that layer that we already need. So I'm just going to turn this one off. And we can basically see now that we can take this and kind of scale it around. And basically we're just masking that gray layer to only be in that rectangle. However, I want this to be as close to my reference as possible and have these round corners on here. And same thing goes with the arrows, right? The arrows on the D-pad. There are some arrows in here if we look for arrows, right? We do have some arrows in here that we could use, but none of them are really like the ones that I want or like the ones that my reference show. So, so the next thing we're going to do here is actually jump over into Illustrator and make some custom alphas, right? These are called alphas. They're just black and white images. And we're going to make some custom alphas that we can then bring into Substance Painter to use on our project. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this plastic grip color here and here. So we're sort of back to where we started. And then we're going to jump over into Illustrator and make some custom shapes. All right, now here we are in Illustrator. I'm just going to go ahead and click New. And for our size here, we don't want this to be too big. This is a pretty simple detail, so it doesn't need necessarily to be super big, but I do want it to be nice and crisp of a detail. So we're gonna go with something like 1000 by 1000. Especially because our texture size is for around 5000 by 5000. So I don't want it to be, there's no need for it to be as big as the texture size, right? And it's kind of a small detail compared to the entire controller, right? So if we're looking at this back in Substance Painter here, and if we're looking at the size of this is going to be our entire image. And this whole thing is 4096 by 4096, so about 4000 by 4000 pixels. The area that shape is going to be taking up is relatively small, so I don't need it to be very large. So we're just going to go with 1000 by 1000 and just hit create. And here we are in Illustrator, and I'm going to go ahead into my layers here, and I'm just going to make a black square for the background, because this is just a black and white image that we're making here. And we're going to take off the stroke. We don't need a stroke on that. And then I'm just going to lock lock that layer. So it's just a black background, basically. Let's actually go ahead and make it the same size as our artboard. Right, and it should just kind of snap into place here when we get both of our corners lined up. And then I'm going to lock that layer so we don't accidentally move it. And then for the square, this is going to be a white color. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my shape tool and just make sure this is a white. So it's just black and white image. And then we're going to make a new layer here. And then we can just draw out our rectangle. And I'm going to go not all the way to the end, but maybe something like that. Put that in the middle. So I think something like that, it about matches my reference. Maybe it's a little bit larger. And then it's really easy to round your corners in Illustrator. We just click on these little guys right here, and that will round all of our corners. So maybe something about like that, I think matches our reference. Right? And then that's it for the first little alpha that we made. So now we can just go to File, Export, and we'll go to Export As. And I'm just going to throw this also in my controller project, and we're going to just save this out as a JPEG. And I want to make sure I click Use Artboards, and then we're going to name this Round Rectangle. And click Export. We want this to be RGB and hit OK. And now we have our first alpha made for our controller. Now for the arrow is going to be a little bit more complicated. So what I'm going to do for the arrow here is we'll go ahead and just delete that rectangle. For the arrow, I'm going to make a square like this. And then I'm going to we'll move this one to the side for now. Actually, let's just duplicate this one. And what I'm going to do is hold down Shift and rotate it 45 degrees like that. And then I'm going to go to my pen tool, and I'm just going to delete that anchor point just like that. And then we can go to our direct selection tool and manipulate this a little bit into the shape that we want. If we want to get these lined up perfectly, we can just select everything here, and we can use our alignment tools, and that should align everything perfectly. Now I do want to make this kind of fit into that space as tightly as possible. So I'm going to scale that up quite a bit. And I think it's going to be kind of like this. And let's line those up together. And then as an extra step, I'm going to go into my properties panel here and just use Pathfinder to unite these together. Like that. And then I do want to round my corners, right? So I'm going to go to my direct select tool, and I don't want to round these corners. So I just want to select the corners that I want to round. So I'm just going to marquee and hold down Shift and just select the corners that I want to round off. And then we can just round those corners to get something like that. Okay, that looks pretty good. And now I'm just going to export that out. So we're just going to go to File. Once again, Export As. There's the other one that I created. We're going to export this as a JPEG, use Artboards. And I'm going to name this Fat Arrow. And click Export. Once again, I want this to be RGB. CMYK is for print. RGB is for digital screens. So we want that to be RGB. Hit OK. And now we have our 2 alphas that we have created. Now jumping back into Substance Painter, it's very easy to bring those in. So we can come down here to our library and click this plus sign. And I'm going to click Add Resources. And I'm just going to control click both of those alpha maps that I made and click Open. It's going to ask me what type of resources are these. So I'm going to define these as an alpha, both of them. And then it's going to say, where do you want these imported to? So I can choose to import them to just this project, right? So project only. I can import them to the current session only. So when I close and open Substance Painter back up, they won't be there. Or I can import them to my library. So they will always be there. So in this case, I'm just going to import them to this project, click OK, and click Import. And there we have our alphas in our project. And once we have our alphas in the library, we can literally just drag and drop them. We're going to deal with the arrow a little bit differently, but with our rectangle, we can just drag and drop it and add it to our project. Now, I don't want to drag and drop it to my 3D view, because if I do that, so if I just drag and drop that in and say I want that to be a mask, it's going to come in sort of like off angle, off kilter a little bit. And I could rotate that back into space, back into the right place. But I want to do that in my 2D view here, because then it's going to come in nice and neat and straight. Right, so let me make sure that we go to our color here. And let's go ahead and make a copy again of our plastic grip here. And so right click, duplicate. And then I'm just going to change the color of that to a lighter gray. I think it's about something like that. Let me check my reference. Yeah, maybe a little bit darker. Something like that. And I'm going to just clear that, remove the mask. So that's going to go on everything. And then I'm just going to drag and drop this guy as a mask right here. And again, for some reason that makes like an extra layer, and that's fine. I'm just going to take the original one here and just get rid of that. And then we have our object, or have our mask there. Now looking at my reference, this little rectangle is a little bit bigger than our island, our little button island right there. So I'm going to scale that up just a tiny bit. And then the first one kind of just kind of comes off. It's kind of like on the top, but not quite. And then I should be able to, let's see if we can just duplicate this. No. So for some reason that doesn't want to duplicate. So let me undo that. And let's see if I can just drag it in again to the same layer, or if it's going to make, it might end up making another layer, which is fine. Yeah, so it does make another layer, but that's fine. We can just do them all as separate layers. Now, in that case, I can probably just duplicate this entire layer. right? And this is a bit wider in this direction. So I'm going to, let's actually get rid of this one here. And let's take this one. And I do want to make that just a little bit wider, fatter, I guess. And then I'm going to move it up there. Like that. And then I can just duplicate this entire layer. So I can just right click, duplicate. And then I will have a duplicate of that I can just pull down. And trying to get the shape here about right. Getting the scale right here is going to be tricky. And a lot of like this texturing stuff is just a matter of like tweaking things, right? So like there's never like a solid formula to make anything look good. It's art, right? So it's going to, it's all about like making adjustments, doing, kind of making things look the way that you want them to look. So don't be afraid to come in and sort of make your own adjustments as you're working. And even if they're separate from mine, right? Even if the sort of adjustments that you're making are different, it's yours. So like at this point, at this stage in the game, right? Like you've done the model. I want the texturing phase to be yours, right? I want you to be like use your own creativity and sort of make the texture how you want it to look, right? So I still feel like I made those a little bit too fat. So let's make it back. Let's back that off a little bit. Let's start with the bottom here. I think that will be a little bit easier. Let's start with the bottom. Duplicate, and then we'll move it up a little bit. Now, this does have, actually, before I duplicate, we can see a little bit of the, if I zoom in here really close, you can see that little line right there. So that's from our alpha. So what we can do here is we can set our blending mode for this to something else like pass through or multiply. Multiply kind of gives us not what we want. We could try, let's try overlay, screen. Screen works. There's still a little bit of a line there, but we can also just drop the opacity a tad until that line kind of goes away. I think that looks pretty good. All right, so now you want to do that on the original first layer, and then when you duplicate it, all those changes will get duplicated as well. There's still a little bit of a line there, but I think once I add some dirt and stuff to it, it's not going to look so bad. And we want to try to get that distance the same on all of them. So I think something like that looks pretty good. And then we have one more kind of at the very bottom here. So I'm going to duplicate that one more time. And we'll take the duplicate and move it down here. Like that. Now notice how we're seeing a little bit of that detail kind of wash over onto this part of our model. We don't want that, right? And because we've already added masks to all these layers, you can't add a second mask to a layer. But what we can do is we can group all these together and then add a mask to the group. So what I can do now, let's do this and go back to our 3D view here. And I do want to make sure that everything looks nice and even in my 3D view. I think that looks pretty good. So what I can do is I can select all 4 of those layers there. And I'm just going to Control G to group them. And we're going to name this group something like gray lines. And I can add a mask to the group. So I'm going to do the same thing I've done with my other shapes and add a mask with color selection. And then I can just pick our color there. And now that detail is only going to show up on that part of the model. So we'll get to the arrow a little bit later. We're going to deal with that a little bit differently. So the next thing I want to cover is the text. Now, honestly, the most difficult part about like adding the text is going to be trying to find the font, the right font, right? And now like the font that we use isn't that important. We're probably not going to be able to find the same exact one that's used in our reference, right? We're probably not going to be able to find something that looks identical to this, but we can try to find something that looks fairly close. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to add in a new layer. So I'm going to add a new fill layer. And once again, the only thing I want here is color. And for this one, I don't even want roughness really. I just want color. And we could add roughness, but I kind of want it to match the texture and everything of what we have here. So I'm just going to do color, and then we'll select a color. We can always change this later. And then on this fill layer, what we can do is we'll come to our library, and I'm going to type in the word type. And I'm going to find something that just sort of right off the bat looks similar, right? And once again, I want to do this in my UV view here, because that's going to be easier to sort of line things up. And the same thing we did for our lines, I'm just going to drag and drop one of these onto our layer here. And I'm going to do this as a mask. And again, for some reason, it makes a new layer for us. I'm not quite sure why, but that's fine. We can just very easily delete this layer. And then I'm going to select this one and just make it a color. Something like that. And then on that type layer, so we're going to click this mask and this fill. And here's our type settings here. So here I can type whatever I want. So it says in all caps, we're going to type in select and then give it quite a few spaces and type in start in all caps. And something like that. So now for our font, we just need to click here and kind of just look through our fonts, and that one is actually pretty close. It's not quite the same. That one's called Anime Matrix. You can download fonts from Adobe Fonts if you like. But it is a very square font. And I think even though it's not exactly the same, I think that one's a pretty good match. But I'm going to look through just in case and see if we can find something else. I'm going to try to remember the name of that one. That one's actually not bad either. I do want something that's a little bit more square looking. So, this is one of those things that we can spend forever just kind of looking through fonts, trying to find the right font that's going to match match what we want. But I think that original one, that anime matrix one, is probably the closest thing that I feel like looking for at the moment. There's probably something closer in that list, but I think this is pretty good. It doesn't look exactly the same, but it looks pretty close, right? And then again, we want to check and see how this looks in our 3D view as well. Right, so probably a little big. So we can come in and select that here and just scale it down a little bit. If you hold down Shift, you will scale uniformly. And then we can just add more spaces here. And that will actually make it smaller as well. So, you know, just find a font that you like and kind of do the best. I think that's pretty close to what I'm looking at on the reference. And then what we can do is we can actually just, once again, we can duplicate this layer. So I'm going to right click and duplicate it. And then for the duplicate, we can move that down here and just change our type here to B and A. And then we can add more spaces. And I think I'm going to choose a different font for this one because it does look a little bit different in our reference. So I think something like that looks pretty good. And it's kind of oriented like this. Oops. Save. And again, when you scale down, hold down Shift and it will scale uniformly. Whoop, don't want to rotate it. The B is kind of in between the two. And so I'm just making adjustments as I see fit, right? We can also change the spacing here and the size. But I think that is pretty close to what I'm looking for. And then once again, just to stay organized, I'm going to take both of these layers, Control G to group them. And for this one, I'm going to write just text. Right, and that's looking pretty darn good so far. So the next thing I want to deal with is the arrows on our number pad. And for the arrow, we're going to do something very similar. So here's my arrow. You can just search. If you lose it, you can just search for fat arrow again and see it. But we're going to do something kind of the same but different with the arrow. So I'm just going to drag and drop that in here. And once again, we'll do this as a mask. And then and let's zoom out here and just sort of scale this down to size. Again, I'm holding down Shift as I scale, so it scales down uniformly. And we'll put that in position there. And I think that's pretty good right there. Now for the layer, though, the layer itself, whoops, we don't want to rotate it. So for the layer itself, what we want, so I'm going to click on my layer here, my actual fill layer. And for this, actually, the only thing I want here is height. So I'm even going to turn off color. And I'm going to just do height, and I'm going to come to my height slider here and just decrease that. And then we're going to see that start to kind of sink in a little bit. Right? And if I need to, I can click back on that mask and scale it down a little bit more, kind of put that in position. Now, if you feel, if I feel like that's a little bit too sharp, let's take a look at it on the 3D view here. that looks pretty good. I do think it's a little bit too sharp. So there's a couple things I could do here. I could decrease the height here until it, maybe something around there looks pretty good. It still looks a little sharp compared to my reference. I can also drop the opacity here, and that may help, even though I don't really see that that's doing much. But the other thing I can do is add a generator to, or a filter to this layer. And generators are basically, they'll create noise or filters. So let's do a little bit of experimentation here on this layer before we duplicate it and change our other layers. So let's right click and go to add. Let's try adding a filter first. So I'm going to add a filter, and then it's going to say no filter is selected. So we click this, and there's a blur filter right there. So I think that's what we want to do. So I'm going to click blur, and then we can increase that blur, and hopefully that works. I think the issue that we're seeing here is that we're applying the blur to our layer here and not the mask. So let's undo that. And instead, let's click our mask and add the filter to the actual mask. So I'm going to click that mask to select it, right click. We're going to go to add filter, and then we're going to say blur. Now we see that blur happening, right? So that's a little much. So I'm going to decrease it down a little bit. I think something like 0.16 looks pretty good, right? I think that looks pretty darn good myself. So now what we can do is we can duplicate this and add it to the other sides of our square here, or our D-pad. So just like I did with the other ones, I'm going to right click and duplicate that layer. And then we can grab that fill and move it around. And if I want to move it, or if I want to rotate it precisely, so like 90 degrees, we have this rotation slider here. So I can actually type in just -90 for that one, or probably, we'll go ahead and do this one here like that. And we'll duplicate again. And then for this one, we probably need to add 180 degrees to that, so it goes all the way around. So that's going to be 270. Right? So then that flips it around like that. And then we'll duplicate one more time. Move that into position. And for this one, we want it to be 180. I keep hitting tab, which will close my properties menu if you wonder why. I'm doing that by accident. All right, so let's check it out in our 3D view here. I think that looks pretty darn good. Looking at my reference, those squares are probably a little bit smaller. Let's see if we can shrink them down a little bit, just using some of our settings here. So we do have a tiling setting, and what we can do, say 32, that looks about right? So what I can do now is just kind of go to my other ones and type in 32. And that way we get the same sizing on all of them. That looks pretty good. So now we can, once again, we'll take all 4 of those layers and Control G to group them. And we'll just name this group D-pad arrows. That is starting to look like a Nintendo controller, right? Looks pretty good. Now here is a little cool thing that you can do as you're working. You can actually do a render of this right here in Substance Painter. If we come up here to this top camera icon and click this, this will take us to our render view. Give that a minute to warm up. It'll give you a little indication here that that's warming up. And sometimes you can get fairly nice renders out of this, right? So this will show you what it's going to look like when it's rendered. You can rotate around this. You can actually change your environment. I don't like this default environment, so I'm going to go to my settings here, which is display settings, and I'm going to change my environment map. The one that I like is the Studio 3. I think that gives you the best results of like a clean render without other images affecting it, right? So as you're sort of working on your controller and you want to take a look at what that's going to look like when it gets rendered, you can just click that that little iRay button and get a render preview that looks pretty nice. I do think I want to lighten that black color up a little bit. So let's actually close out of that. Again, to do that, you have a little paintbrush. So that toggles between the two modes. So that will go back to our brush mode. So I'm going to come down here and look for our base colors. And we're going to look for this black D-pad color. And I'm actually just going to lighten up this color a tad. Right? It's not super black. I think something around right there looks pretty good. Now, I do want to show you a few other things. We're not completely done. I think we just have sort of like the base color and the base textures and everything done. Let's make this thing look a little bit older and a little bit worn, a little bit more used, right? We can add some dirt and grime and stuff to this. And we're going to do that with smart masks. So I did mention that I typically don't like to use smart materials, but I do like using smart masks. And I want to show you how to do that. So what we can do is add a new fill layer. So this is going to be, I'm going to call this a dirt layer, right? So I'm going to create a new fill layer here. And I want to make sure that this is on top of everything. See, I accidentally had this layer selected down here. So it just added that fill layer here. So I'm going to go to the very top here and add a fill layer. And this is going to be my dirt layer. So all I want here, once again, is just roughness. And yeah, we could add height later. Let's try to get this looking good first. So I want this to be very rough, right? This is like a dirt layer, so it shouldn't be super reflective. And then I'm going to make this sort of like a brownish, a really dark brown for my dirt layer. Something like that, right? So just a basic color for our dirt layer. Now I'm going to go over to my smart masks. This is a lot of fun here, playing around with these, and they're all named differently. So here's one called Dirty and Dusty, Dirt Cavities. That's probably the one, that might be the one that I use. Lots of really different fun smart masks to use. And what this is going to do is use all those mesh maps that we created, back before, and basically put this grime or this dirt layer that we made, but only in certain areas. So like if I do this dirt cavities here, right? So I'm just going to click and drag and drop this over here in the mask for that layer. Give that a second to load in. And now you can see that we have like this dirt and grime and stuff in our corners here, right? So you see it all in here. I think that's a little much. I do want to bring that down a little bit. So I'm going to look at I'm going to look at this mask builder here and just tweak some of these settings a little bit. Maybe bring the levels down. And we can bring the grunge amount down a little bit. I think subtlety is really what we want to strive for here. I actually like the grunge up high. I just think the actual dirt itself, see, that looks pretty cool, but it is a little bit overkill. So what we can do now, and there's lots of different parameters that we can play around here. But what I'm going to do here is just go back to my main layer here and drop the opacity. So it's just sort of like a light dusting. Right. So that looks pretty good. Nothing too crazy. We can definitely edit it a lot more. And let's do one more. So I'm going to name this like dirt. Cavities. Let's do one more, and this is just going to be dust. So once again, I just want color and roughness. We're going to make our dust kind of like a dark gray. And once again, I want it to be very rough because dust isn't super reflective. It's pretty rough. And then let's just look for a smart mask here. So here we have dust, soft edges. Let's just look for one. Let's search for dust and see. Here's one that's just called dust, dirt, dusty, dust soft. So you can definitely just experiment around with them. I think I like this dust dirty one. So I'm just going to left click and drag that over here. See, that looks pretty cool. Now it is a bit strong, right? It's a bit much. And I probably don't want it everywhere, right? Like I probably don't want it on my buttons. If we're thinking about this in terms of this is something that's being used, I definitely don't want it all over the whole model. So let's edit this a little bit. Let's go to our mask editor and let's play with the balance. Some of these smart masks will take a little bit of time to adjust, again, because they're reading all of those mesh maps that we made. So they may take a little bit of time to see the adjustments, right, when we make an adjustment like that. And again, it's very dependent on the texture size that you're choosing to use, the computer that you're using, the, sort of like the beefiness of the computer. So I kind of like it like this. I do still think it's a little strong, so I'm going to just take my opacity down a little bit more. Maybe something like 27%, something like that, right? And just enough to like break up the reflections, right? So if I'm looking at this, looking at my reflections, see how they're being broken up a little bit right in here. Whereas if I just turn this off, it's a very clean surface. So I do want to break up those reflections a little bit. And then again, I don't want it on my button, so we can add that color selection mask. So, but again, we already have a mask here. So in order to add another mask on top of this, I need to group it. Now we can group a single layer. So Control G to just group that single layer. And now I can add a color selection mask to that single layer, right? And then I want this on everything except for my buttons. So I'm going to select my first part there, and then I'm also going to select this, and we'll do the cord as well. Right. So now we have all that dirt and grime just on the buttons. All right, now let's have a little bit more fun with this, and I'm going to add a sticker. Now, I downloaded a image just from the internet that has transparency. So I got this Mario image right here, and I'm going to make this a sticker. So I'm going to identify this as just a texture, and we're just going to import it into the project because I probably won't use it again after this, and just click import, and there it is there. Now, to make a sticker, what we need is a sticker layer. This is very easy to do. So all we have to do is go to our search and we can type in sticker. And you have like this little custom sticker thing here. And I can just drag and drop that to my controller. Right. And it's going to just put in a default like black square. So what we need to do is come over to our color now, right? So for this one, I actually do want height and roughness. I don't need metalness though. And then for our image inputs, I'm going to go over to custom image, and we're just going to look for that image that we brought in. We can also just drag and drop from our library. So I can come over to my textures. Let's clear out our search, and we can look for it in our textures. There it is right there. So I can just drag and drop that into custom image. Give that a second to load in. And there we have our custom sticker. Now, obviously, I want it to be a little bit smaller than this. So let's come over here and mess with our settings a little bit. I'm going to go to tiling, and let's decrease that a little bit. We can go to rotation, kind of rotate him around. Can move him around like that. So there's all kinds of details that we can add to our sticker. One of the really cool ones that we have is if we come to look through some of these settings that we have here. There's 3D projection settings. Let's go to parameters. We have a wear and tear setting here. So I can do sticker edge wear. Right, there's folds. So as we're increasing that, we're getting some folds in our sticker. We have a corner fold right here that we can mess around with. So all kinds of really cool properties that we can sort of tweak for our stickers. We also have a material here where we can change things like the roughness. So stickers are generally pretty shiny. So let's take down the roughness. And let's take down the height intensity as well. Right. And then, maybe right there, it's a little bit of, we got to give it a second to load here. Stickers are apparently very, very intensive in terms of RAM. All right. So we got a little bit of like a fold right there. So like maybe as we're playing the games, our thumb is hitting that and making that fold up. Right. So lots of really cool things we can do. We can also paint directly on our controller. So I just want to show you how to do that really quick. So say, for example, this is my controller when I'm a kid, and maybe I'm taking this to a friend's house to play, and maybe they only have one controller. So I need to bring my controller over, and I don't want us to get confused over which which controller is mine and which controller is my friend's. So maybe I write my name on it, right? So what I'm going to do is add a paint layer. And then that will automatically give us our brush, and we can basically paint directly on our object. So I'm going to sort of tweak my brush a little bit. Let's find a different brush to use. Let's do maybe marker. Let's look for something like marker. There's a marker brush there. Right, so that looks pretty cool. And let's change the color to black. Or if it's Sharpie, right? Sharpies tend to have kind of like a purplish hue. So let's do like a really dark purple. And then I'm going to decrease my brush size. Same way we do it in Photoshop. We just use our bracket keys, which are to the right of the P key and below your plus and equal sign on your keyboard. And then I'm going to write my name. Right, so now we don't get confused about whose controller is whose. Okay, so for the most part, we're done with our texturing of our object here. So now we're basically ready to export out all of our textures. So to export our textures, it's relatively straightforward. We're going to go to File, Export Textures. And we want to go to Output Templates. And we want to look for a template. Now we have an Arnold AI standard template here that we're going to use. And I'm just going to use it as is. Basically all of these things are fine. Perhaps in another video, I'll talk about how to customize this and customize your maps. But as just a normal intro to texturing and Substance Painter, just use a default standard here. You can even use PBR metallic roughness, and that will kind of give you what you need. Or you can use the Arnold or whichever renderer you happen to be using, right? If you're using something like Keyshot or RenderMan, you can change those. But we're just going to use Arnold in this case. And then we're going to go back over to settings, and this is where we want to export our textures. So I want my textures to be in the proper directory here, right? So let's click this and go to our controller project folder and just select that folder. So now our textures are all going to save to that directory. Output template, PBR metallic roughness is fine. Our file type, PNGs are fine. We could change this to JPEGs if we want. In fact, I'm going to do that. I'm going to change this to JPEG. The reason being is that sometimes if you save out as a PNG and there's an alpha channel or a transparency on your image, Maya will want to hook it up in a way that it's not really the proper way to connect it. So in this case, we're just going to do a JPEG. And we're going to click Export. And now all of our textures have exported. If you want to look at them, you can navigate to that folder where we save them. So our controller project here. And here are all of our JPEG images of our controller. So there's our base color map. Right? Some of these we're not going to see. So like we have no light being emitted from it. So Our emissive is just going to be black. Here is our height map. Our metalness map, which again is, we have no metal objects, so we're not really seeing it. We get a little bit of information in our normal, right, with those arrows and our sticker. You can really sort of see the folds in our sticker here too. And then our roughness map. So really the only ones we're going to be using here to bring over into Maya is our, probably just our color, our normal, and our roughness. And I think we can maybe bring in the height, but everything else, those three are pretty much the only thing we need for this. Now, depending on your model, if you do have metal parts to it and you want it to have metalness, then you will get a metalness map. If you have parts of it that are glowing or emitting light, you'll have an emissive map. So this is a very simple object. So we have very simple, limited textures to it. So that is the workflow for working in Substance Painter, texturing in Substance Painter. We're basically just scratching the surface here. There's a lot more that you can do within Substance Painter, but for a very simple project, this is a great start. Now in the next video, we'll talk about how to take those textures that we generated from Substance Painter and hook those, bring those back into Maya and plug them into Maya and do a really nice render in Maya. And as we're just waiting here, I'm going to click on this sort of in shot here just to get a really nice, cool render of our textured controller right here within Substance Painter.